The Hindu Kush mountains have a way of swallowing sound. It's not just quiet, it is a heavy, oppressive silence that feels like the air itself is pressing against your eardrums. I was the platoon sergeant for Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, deployed to the Khyber province in late 2011. We had seen our share of combat, but nothing prepared us for the call we got regarding outpost Black Ridge. Black Ridge was a small observation post, OP, sitting on a jagged spur of rock overlooking the Pesh River Valley. It was manned by a single squad from Charlie Company, 12 men, commanded by a staff sergeant named Miller. They were supposed to check in every 4 hours. At 0400, they missed their comms check. By 0600, battalion command was hailing them on every frequency. By 0800, the drone feed showed nothing but static due to heavy cloud cover. That's when we got the order, gear up. Go see why Charlie Company isn't answering. We airlifted into a landing zone about 2 clicks south of the ridge to avoid alerting anyone if the OP was under siege. The hike up was brutal. The elevation was over 8,000 feet, and the air was thin enough to make your lungs burn with every step. My guys were on edge. Usually if an OP gets hit, you hear it. You hear the echo of PKM fire bouncing off the canyon walls. You see the smoke. But Black Ridge was dead silent. As we crested the final rise, the OP came into view. It was a fortress of HESCO barriers and sandbags, looking distinct against the gray slate of the mountain. The American flag was still snapping in the wind atop the comms antenna. The 19 Malawian Quach's grenade launcher was still mounted in the turret facing north. Everything looked perfect. Bravo 6, this is Bravo 2, I whispered into my radio. I have eyes on the OP. No movement. Gate is open. That was the first red flag. The entry control point, ECP, gate was swung wide open. In Indian country, you never leave the gate open. Never. We moved in a wedge formation, sweeping for IEDs, expecting an ambush at any second. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from exertion, but from the wrongness of it all. We breached the perimeter wire and entered the compound. Clear left. Clear right. My soldiers shouted their calls, but their voices sounded too loud in the empty courtyard. We swept the mortar pit first. The 60mm mortar tube was set up, a round resting halfway out of the ammo crate, ready to drop. But no gunner. We moved to the sleeping quarters. Cots were unmade. Boots were on the floor. I walked into the Tactical Operations Center, TOC, the brain of the outpost. This is where the cold really hit me. On the desk, a cup of coffee was sitting next to the radio. I reached out and touched the ceramic mug. It was still warm. "Top, you need to see this," one of my team leaders called out from the chow hall tent. I walked over, the gravel crunching loudly under my boots. Inside the chow tent, plates of food were sitting on the plywood tables. Half-eaten MREs, a game of spades laid out with the cards face up, and a portable DVD player paused in the middle of a movie. It looked like the rapture. It looked like 12 men had simply evaporated into the ether in the span of a single heartbeat. "Where are the weapons?" I asked. "That's the thing, Sergeant," the corporal replied, his face pale. "They're all here. We did a full inventory. We found 12 M4 carbines stacked neatly against the sandbags in the TOC. We found their sidearms. We found their night vision goggles, NVGs. In modern warfare, a soldier is married to his weapon. You sleep with it, you eat with it, you take it to the latrine. For a soldier to leave his rifle behind is unthinkable. For 12 soldiers to leave their rifles behind, stacked neatly, suggests something that defies military logic. I went back to the radio in the TOC. I checked the logbook. The last entry was scribbled at 0345. Sector North quiet. Wind picking up. Visibility dropping to 0. There were no distress calls. No reports of enemy contact. No troops in contact panic. Just routine. And then nothing. I ordered my platoon to set up a 360-degree perimeter. We were now occupying a ghost ship. I had men posted on the heavy guns, but I could tell they were spooked. They kept glancing back at the empty boots and the warm coffee. The sun was starting to dip behind the peaks, casting long, jagged shadows across the camp. "Command, this is Bravo 6, I radioed up. "We have secured Black Ridge. We have found all sensitive items. Weapons, comms, crypto keys are secure. But, negative contact on Charlie personnel. Repeat, no soldiers found. The site is abandoned, but there are no signs of struggle." "Say again, Bravo 6? Did they desert?" "Negative," I snapped. "Their gear is here. Their wallets are here. Their pictures of their wives and kids are taped to the walls. Men don't desert without their boots and guns, Command. They are just gone." As night fell, the temperature plummeted. We activated our night vision. The green phosphor glow of the world usually made me feel safe, but tonight, it made the empty outpost look like a haunted house. Every fluttering distinct piece of trash, every shifting shadow looked like a man. That's when Private Gomez, my youngest guy, called out from the northern wall. "Sarge, I found something on the Hescos, outside the wire." I moved to Gomez's position. He was pointing his IR laser at the ground just outside the open gate. "Look at the dirt, Sarge." I adjusted my focus. In the dust, there were drag marks. Not the chaotic scuffs of a firefight, but smooth, wide lines like heavy sacks had been pulled. But there were no footprints leading away. Just the drag marks, starting at the gate and vanishing over the lip of the ridge into the dead ground below. "It looks like they were carried," Gomez whispered. "But who carried them without leaving prints?" "Wind," I said, trying to rationalize it. The wind scrubbed the footprints, but the drag marks were deeper. It was a weak theory, and we both knew it. I organized a 4-man recon team. We weren't leaving our brothers behind. If they were taken, they couldn't be far. The coffee had been warm. We had missed whatever happened by less than an hour. We dropped over the ledge, following the faint indentations in the shale. The terrain here was a nightmare, loose rock that clattered with every step. We descended about 300 meters into a narrow ravine that the satellite maps barely registered. The air down here was stagnant, smelling of sulfur and rotting vegetation, which was strange for this altitude. The drag marks ended abruptly at the mouth of a cave. It wasn't a natural cave. It was an old Soviet-era mine shaft, reinforced with rotting timber beams. The darkness inside was absolute. My NVDs bloomed with grain as I stared into the void. "Standard entry," I signaled. "Check your corners." We moved in. The air inside was colder than the mountain air outside. It smelled of wet earth and copper, the smell of blood. About 50 meters in, the tunnel opened up into a larger chamber. And there, we found the first piece of undeniable evidence. It was a single boot, a standard-issue tan combat boot. I picked it up. Inside, written in Sharpie, was the name Miller, the staff sergeant. But the boot wasn't unlaced. It had been ripped off. The laces were still tied tight. The force required to pull a tied boot off a man's foot is immense. "Sarge," my point man hissed. "Look at the walls." I shined my IR illuminator on the cave walls. They were covered in scratches. Fingernail scratches. Hundreds of them. And among the scratches, written in what looked like charcoal or maybe dried blood, were coordinates. Not coordinates for a location. Coordinates for artillery fire. And they were the coordinates for this cave. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Miller hadn't been dragged here. Or if he was conscious enough to leave a message. He wanted us to bomb this location. He wanted us to bury this place. "We need to leave. Now," I ordered. But as we turned to retreat, a sound stopped us. It was a rhythmic clicking, coming from deeper in the tunnel. Click, 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 like a radio handset being keyed without anyone speaking. Then a voice. It didn't sound human. It sounded like a recording being played back at the wrong speed. "Sector North, quiet." It was Miller's voice. The logbook entry. "Wind, picking, up." "Is that a recording?" Gomez asked, raising his rifle. "Move," I yelled. We scrambled back up the tunnel. As we ran, the clicking got louder, faster. It wasn't coming from a radio. It was coming from the rocks themselves, echoing from multiple directions. It was a psychological operation, psyops, but primitive and terrifying. Someone, or something, was luring us deeper. We burst out of the cave mouth and back into the moonlit ravine. "Command! This is Bravo 6. I screamed into the handset. "We have found a possible holding site at Grid 44 Sierra. Requesting immediate illumination rounds and QRF standby." "Bravo 6, say again?" "You're breaking up. We are reading significant thermal bloom in your sector." "Thermal bloom? From what?" "From underneath you, Bravo 6. The ground shook. Not an earthquake, but an explosion. The mine shaft we had just exited collapsed inward, a massive plume of dust erupting into the night. If we had been in there 30 seconds longer, we would be buried. But the explosion didn't come from a bomb. It came from a collapse triggered by supports being pulled. It was a trap. A spider trap. The enemy hadn't just taken Charlie Company. They had set the stage to take the rescue team too. We scrambled back up the ridge to the OP, lungs burning, waiting for gunfire that never came. That was the worst part. The enemy never fired a single shot at us. They just watched. They manipulated the environment. When we got back to the OP, the coffee cup I had touched earlier, the one that was warm, it was now knocked over, spilled across the logbook. We had cleared the TOC. We had guards on the perimeter. Someone had been inside the room with us while we were looking at the maps. We held Black Ridge until dawn, the longest night of my life. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Every shadow looked like a soldier being dragged away. When the medevac birds and the investigation team finally arrived in the morning light, the relief was overwhelming, but it was hollow. We never found the bodies. We searched the collapsed mine. We brought in excavation equipment. We found scraps of uniforms, more boots, and those haunting scratches on the rocks, but no bodies. It was as if Charlie Company had been pulled into the heart of the mountain. Intelligence later suggested that a new cell of foreign fighters had moved into the valley, specialists in kidnapping and psychological warfare. They theorized that Charlie Company was dosed with a sedative gas, explaining the lack of struggle, and carried off to be used as leverage or propaganda videos. But no videos ever surfaced. No ransom demands were ever made. But I know what I saw. I know the feeling of the warm coffee in a room that should have been freezing. I know the sound of Miller's voice echoing in a cave that had no speakers. Operation Black Ridge wasn't a battle. It was a disappearing act. Before we flew out, I took one last look at the outpost. We were abandoning it. Command deemed it tactically cursed. As the helicopter lifted off, I looked down at the gate. I had closed it personally. I had locked it with a chain. Looking down from 500 feet, through the dust of the rotor wash, I saw it. The gate was wide open again. To this day, 12 names are etched on a memorial wall, listed as missing in action / presumed dead. But in my nightmares, they aren't dead. They are still in the dark, scratching coordinates on the wall, waiting for the artillery that never came. We found their gear. We found their food. But we never found the soldiers. And I fear that whatever took them is still up there, waiting for the next patrol to open the gate. 3 years passed. The military calls it moving on. But for those of us who stood in that empty outpost, it was just waiting. I had rotated back to the States, taking a job as an instructor at Fort Benning. I tried to leave the Hindu Kush behind, but the mountains have a way of following you home. The silence of my living room at night felt too much like the silence of Black Ridge. In the winter of 2014, the waiting ended. I received a visit from a lieutenant colonel from Naval Intelligence. He didn't come to my office, he came to my house, late at night, in civilian clothes. That's how you know it's not official business, it's unfinished business. He placed a heavy, pelican-hardened case on my coffee table. "We found a helmet," he said, his voice flat. "A shepherd found it washed up on the banks of the Pesh River, 5 miles downstream from the ridge. It belonged to Private First Class Holloway, one of the missing 12. My stomach turned. Holloway was the squad's comms guy. "Is there a body?" I asked. "No, just the helmet." But the camera was still mounted. The SD card was corrupted, water-damaged, and encrypted. It took the NSA boys 6 months to pull the data. "You were the first one on the scene, Sergeant. We need you to verify what we're seeing." He opened the laptop and loaded a video file. The timestamp read October 2011, 3:50 hours, 10 minutes before they missed their comms check. 10 minutes before they vanished. The footage was grainy, shot in the green monochrome of night vision. It showed the interior of the outpost. It was calm. Holloway was walking the perimeter. You could hear the crunch of his boots and the heavy breathing of a man at high altitude. He stopped by the northern wall, looking out into the pitch-black valley. "Miller," Holloway's voice whispered on the recording. "You see that?" The camera panned left. Staff Sergeant Miller stepped into the frame. "See what?" "The fog. It's moving against the wind." I leaned in closer to the screen. On the video, a thick, unnatural bank of fog was rolling up the cliffside. It wasn't drifting, it was surging like a tidal wave of white static. But what chilled me to the bone wasn't the weather. It was the sound. As the fog hit the perimeter wire, the audio on the camera spiked. It wasn't the sound of wind. It was a low-frequency hum, almost mechanical, vibrating the microphone diaphragm. And underneath the hum, barely audible, were voices. Not shouting, not screaming. Chanting. "Stand to," Miller yelled in the video. "Everyone up. Stand to." The camera whipped around as the squad scrambled out of their tents. They were professional. They moved to their guns. They locked and loaded. But they didn't fire. "Target," someone yelled. "I don't have a target." Then the fog breached the wall. It didn't pour in like smoke. It moved with purpose, tendrils reaching out toward the men. On the screen, I watched Private Holloway raise his rifle. But then his arms went slack. The rifle dropped to his chest, hanging by its sling. He didn't fall. He just stopped. Miller grabbed him by the shoulder. "Holloway, snap out of it." Holloway turned to look at Miller. The night vision caught his eyes. They were wide open, pupils dilated to black saucers. "They are home," Holloway said. His voice was completely devoid of emotion. "They want us to come home." One by one, the soldiers in the frame lowered their weapons. There was no violence, no gunfire, just 12 highly trained killers going completely limp, mesmerized by something inside that fog. The last thing the camera recorded was Holloway unclipping his helmet. He didn't take it off in a panic. He took it off gently, setting it on the wall, the camera facing the valley. The lens watched as 12 silhouettes walked over the HESCO barriers, stepping into the empty air, disappearing into the white mist. They didn't rappel down. They just walked into the dark. Then, the fog receded as quickly as it had come, leaving the outpost empty. The camera recorded silence for another hour until the battery died. The lieutenant colonel closed the laptop. The room was silent. "We analyzed the audio," he said softly. "The frequency of that hum, it matches nothing in our database. No engine, no aircraft, no tectonic plate movement. But we found one match in a historical archive." He looked me dead in the eye. "It matches the recording of a Soviet distress beacon from the same valley in 1982. A Spetsnaz unit that went missing. They never found them either." I sat back, the realization washing over me. We had been looking for insurgents. We had been looking for a trap. But what happened on Black Ridge wasn't war. It was something ancient. The gate I saw open, the warm coffee, the clicking in the cave. We weren't chasing soldiers. We were walking into a feeding ground. And the worst part, as the colonel packed up his gear, he handed me a photocopy of a satellite image taken 2 days ago. "We are planning to reopen Black Ridge next month," he said. "Strategically, we need that ground." I looked at the photo. The outpost was still there, weathered by years of snow. But in the center of the courtyard, visible from space, someone had arranged rocks into letters. Huge letters WEA, RESTILLHERE. "Do not let them go back," I whispered. "It's not my call, Sergeant," he replied, walking to the door. "Orders are orders." I knew then that the story wasn't over. The mountain was hungry again, and the army was about to serve it another meal. I couldn't stop them. The military machine is a heavy wheel. Once it starts turning, it crushes everything in its path, logic included. Command viewed the loss of Black Ridge not as a supernatural event, but as a tactical embarrassment. They wanted that ground back. They called it Operation Iron Hammer. I managed to attach myself to the mission as a civilian tactical advisor. I wasn't carrying a rifle this time, but I was carrying the weight of what I knew. The unit assigned to retake the ridge wasn't a standard infantry platoon. It was a reinforced ranger element, 30 men, heavy weapons, and enough surveillance tech to monitor a small city. They weren't just going to occupy the outpost, they were going to dissect it. We inserted at midday. The sun was high and brutal, bleaching the color out of the mountains. 2 47 Chinooks touched down on the landing zone, kicking up a brown out of dust that tasted like copper. I watched the Rangers pour out, fast, aggressive, screaming orders. They were confident. They had heard the rumors about the ghost platoon, but to them, ghosts were just targets they hadn't identified yet. "Perimeter set," the lieutenant shouted. "Get the sensors up. I want eyes on every inch of this rock." This time, we didn't just rely on eyes and ears. We set up ground-penetrating radar, GPR. We placed seismic sensors every 50 meters down the slope. We mounted thermal cameras that could detect the heat signature of a mouse at 1,000 yards. If anything moved on Black Ridge, we would know. I walked to the center of the compound. The message I had seen on the satellite photo, "We are still here," was gone. The rocks had been scattered. "Did your team clear debris?" I asked the sergeant major. "Negative, sir. Ground was like this when we landed." That meant someone, or something, had cleaned up before we arrived. It knew we were coming. The first 6 hours were deceptively quiet. The engineers rebuilt the HESCO barriers. The comms guys established a satellite uplink that cut through the interference. It felt like a triumph of modern warfare. We were imposing order on chaos. But as the sun began to set, the mood shifted. It wasn't the men, it was the equipment. At 1900 hours, the seismic sensors started glitching. I was in the new Tactical Operations Center, TOC, watching the monitors. "What is that?" I pointed at the screen. "Reading a tremor, sir," the tech operator said, frowning. "Magnitude 2.0. Very localized." "Where is the epicenter?" The operator tapped his keyboard, refining the data. He paused, his face going slack. "Sir, the epicenter isn't deep underground. It's surface level. It's moving." The earthquake was walking around the perimeter. "Stand to." The call went out. "Contact on the sensors." 30 Rangers rushed to the walls, weapons raised. "I have nothing on thermals," a sniper yelled from the tower. "Negative heat. Cold. It's all cold." I grabbed the lieutenant. "Tell them to switch to audio. Forget the thermals. Listen." He keyed his mic, "All units, sound discipline. Listen." The firing line went silent. The wind howled through the valley, but underneath it, we heard it scrape. 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 It sounded like heavy stones being dragged over concrete. It was coming from the cliff edge, the sheer drop that was supposed to be unclimbable. "Pop a flare," the lieutenant ordered. A 40mm illumination round shot up into the sky, bursting into a brilliant white phosphorus glow. It swung under its parachute, casting dancing shadows against the cliff face. We all leaned over the wall, looking down. The light revealed the cliff. And it was moving. Thousands of them. They weren't soldiers. They weren't insurgents. They were beetles. Massive, black mountain beetles, millions of them, swarming up the cliff face in a carpet of living armor. The sound was their shells clicking together. "It's just bugs," a private laughed nervously. "It's just damn bugs." "Why are they running?" I whispered. "Beetles don't swarm like that unless they are fleeing something." They were running up the mountain. They were terrified of what was below them in the ravine. Then, the flare burned out, plunging us back into darkness. And in that split second of blindness, the GPR system, the radar looking underground, screamed in alarm. The operator in the TOC shouted over the radio, his voice cracking with panic. "Contact! Massive contact!" "Where?" the lieutenant screamed. "I don't see them." "Not outside, sir," the operator yelled. "Underneath. They are directly underneath the compound. And they are coming up." The ground in the center of the outpost, the very ground where the "We are still here" message had been, erupted. It wasn't an explosion of fire. It was an explosion of dirt. The hard-packed earth buckled as if a fist had punched through from below. The brand-new HESCO barriers toppled inward. The Rangers turned their weapons inward, facing the center of their own base. "Fire!" someone screamed. M4s and saws opened up, pouring lead into the dust cloud rising from the center of the camp. Tracers zipped into the hole, ricocheting off metal. We heard the distinct ping-ping-ping of bullets hitting steel. Whatever was coming out of the ground was armored. Through the dust, a shape rose. It was jagged, rusted, and covered in wet earth. It looked like a claw or a cage. And then the sound hit us. The hum. The same mechanical, vibrating hum from the video footage 3 years ago. It dropped every soldier to their knees, vibrating our teeth and our skulls. My vision blurred. I saw the Rangers collapsing, clutching their heads. But I didn't collapse. I had heard it before. I was inoculated. I stumbled toward the center of the pit, squinting through the dust. The object that had risen from the earth wasn't a monster. It was a hatch. An industrial, Soviet-era blast door, pushed open from the inside. And standing in the opening, bathed in the red light of our tactical lasers, was a man. He was wearing a torn, rotted uniform. U.S. Army pattern. He looked up at me. His face was gaunt, his skin gray, but I recognized him. It was Staff Sergeant Miller. He wasn't dead. He wasn't a ghost. He opened his mouth, and over the deafening hum, he screamed one word. "Run!" Then, the darkness inside the hatch surged upward, grabbing him, and pulling him back down into the earth. The ground shook violently, and the entire center of the outpost began to sink. We weren't fighting a battle. We were standing on top of a machine that was waking up.